That's good. Because we have a problem here in the Midwest, and I'm not very politically correct when I say this, is that the problem with very conservative regions of the country is that they don't believe that you can actually create high technology here and make money on it. They'll invest in restaurants and they'll invest in software, but if you come along and say, look, I'm an engineer, I got this fantastic medical device, this thing will be worth, $500 million in 4 or 5 years. And in fact, when I sell the first one, will be profitable, they don't believe it. Because they're just so conservative, they don't think you can do that. You can go to the West Coast and you can say the same thing. If you create a medical device and that device works, like, for example, MRIs, all right? It only took 2 years for MRIs to take over the marketplace once a good form of MRI scanning was actually released to the marketplace. Nobody would believe that here in the Midwest. They say it's going to take you 5 years to prove and get it on the market. But technology is different. Technology, when people see the value of technology, particularly the other technology people, it gets accepted very quickly. And that's something that you have to be on either coast for people to really understand. They understand that the rest of the country just doesn't get it. So what it really comes down to, and what I've been talking a lot, is personalities and attitudes. All right, it's not where can I get money or how fast can I get it or where can I get an idea. The important thing about being an entrepreneur is really what's your attitude. Oh, let me go back a slide. I think I missed the one part. All right, yeah, the other aspect I want to bring up to you and I want you to consider is there is a whole area that people don't talk about called entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is working within a company, whatever company you join, and trying to bring an entrepreneurial attitude to the company. The larger the company and the more stable it is, the older the company, the harder it is. You join a very big engineering firm, it's going to be very hard for you to bring entrepreneurial attitudes to that company. If you join a smaller entrepreneurial firm, those owners were probably entrepreneurs themselves just a few years ago. They're going to be more open to it. But it's the attitude of, and we're going to talk about some of those things in a minute, of what can I do with the company I'm working for to try to help them grow, to try to help them be stable in a changing economy. If you have a service that you have today or a product you're selling today, there's a good chance you're not going to be selling it in 4 or 5 years. The market's going to change, the needs are going to change, and that software or that product just will not be in high demand. So it works out, it's called the product life cycle. And I don't know if you've run into that in your classes. Everything has a lifetime that you create it, you have early adopters, you sell it in volume, and then it becomes outdated and the sales drop off. A lot of companies don't realize that. And so they develop a product, they bring it on the market, and they say, okay, we're an ongoing company, and they find out that after 2 or 3 years somebody is scooping. That happens constantly in software. Because as you build software, it becomes bigger and more complicated, more patches, and then 2 or 3 guys sit down in the evening and write a new piece of software in a better language, and they can wrap rings around your old archaic piece of software that you're paying huge amounts to support people to keep maintaining, and they can bring it on the market at half the price. That happens in everything. You go to the doctor's office and you look at this new piece of equipment. Okay, it's a new EKG or it's a new MRI. And they have new MRIs that, I mean, they're literally this big instead of the big ring. It's a small component that just goes around your body and does the same thing. What's going to happen to those old MRIs? Nobody's going to want to sit in those big, ugly rings. Right? So the doctors are going to be forced to buy new hardware. That's great because that drives our technology businesses, but that means that poor MRI company with the old ring or the company that's making those big superconducting magnets has got a problem. Their sales are dropping off. So bringing entrepreneurship to a company can be a way to keep that company working, keep that company surviving, and also present you with some opportunities. You can work with an existing company and you can develop new ideas and new products at a lower risk, because you can have a steady income while you do it. and show that company some future potential. If you can convince the company, let's say you're working in the engineering department and you have made a friend of an inventor in the company, this guy who keeps coming up with ideas that management doesn't want to listen to, you could play the role of taking that to management, trying to build a program, try to build a case study, and try to build a business plan around that piece of technology and to convince them to invest in it. And you can do all that while you're actually getting paid, which would be nice. And that's an attitude that some companies are starting to pick up, but a lot of companies don't get it yet. They just don't see the value in doing that. They'll have their R&D programs where the management decides which direction research is going to go, and then they develop something, and it becomes so long and laborious, by the time they get into market, it may or may not be of some value. But here's your one engineer sitting down here who's been working in the evenings and weekends with this great idea that they just ignore because it wasn't coming down from on high. I've seen that happen many, many times. The other alternative of doing this approach is that if you present it to the company and they don't buy it, ask them for the rights to it. That way you could go off and start your own company with a good piece of technology that somebody that you trust and know has already invented. So it gives you an opportunity to find something new and bring it to market. There's all different ways to be an entrepreneur. That's what I'm trying to get across. It's your attitude and how you approach your career and business. So if you're going to be a technologist, or if you're going to be an engineer, and you're just going to be an academic, or you're going to work in the industry, these are some of the things, among many, of what you have to have for an attitude. Obviously, you have to be interested in the reality of the situation. You can't be an academic and without knowing the material or the science of the area you're working in. You can't work in business without really understanding the technology or your engineering trade. That's what you've been doing all these years, and getting a more in-depth, realistic perception and understanding of what you're doing. And whether you're a researcher or you're in industry, you also have to look behind and beyond the obvious. Right? The way to get in trouble as an engineer is if you don't look for potential problems in what you're building. If you're building a new building, you have to anticipate every potential problem that you can have, and you have to factor that into your calculations, right? I mean, that's just common sense. That's something you need to be able to do. But you also look for incremental improvement, particularly if you're doing research in an academic environment. You might not get the next Nobel Prize by coming up with a totally new solution to something, but a lot of research is done by incremental improvements. You just find a little better way to do something. What we do at our company is we tweak proteins and antibodies. We have a client who is using a protein as a cancer targeting agent. The problem is it's eliminated from the body too slowly and it builds up in the kidney. Well, I have a protein chemist who can play with that huge protein molecule, and he can make it release from the body a little quicker, reduce its biological half-life, just by tweaking a couple of the active molecules on the protein. All right? He's literally an artist at doing that, and that's his expertise. And that's what we do as a company, and people pay good money to make those little improvements on the molecule. And oh, by the way, they can usually patent it, those changes, and it increases the patent life on their molecules. You need those things to be an entrepreneur, plus you need a couple more. One of the things you need is to be interested in all aspects of everything. And this I can't stress enough. If you're going to be a technologist and you're interested in technology, you can't just sit off in the corner on your desk and do what you want to do. You have to be interested in everything. If somebody's talking about a business proposal, you should learn how to do business proposals. If someone's saying we need to apply for funding or do a government contract, get involved in that. If somebody's doing sales, ask if you can do some sales support. Learn every aspect of everything in whatever you do. I tend to present it as know your trade, learn everything else in self-defense. Because if you don't know it, somebody's going to give you a hard time about it, or somebody's going to take advantage of you in the future. Learn how to read legal contracts. It's not that difficult. You're going to get a PhD, you can learn how to read a legal contract, believe me, even though it's totally impossible when you read the first one. And I would say that's one big difference between just being a technologist and being an entrepreneur. Be interested in everything. Learn a little bit about everything. You may not be an expert, but learn enough to understand it, so if people start giving you a line, you'll know where they're going off track and you can call them on. The other thing that's very different is you need to talk and think like an end user. It's very important no matter what you're doing, and I think this is true for most businesses as well. They forget that it's the customer and the problem of the customer and the pain of the customer, we call it, that you're trying to solve. You're not just trying to create a product that somebody will buy. You're trying to solve somebody's personal problem where they would pay money to buy that. And you have to understand that if you're going to be an entrepreneur. Think and act like the end user, and in fact, figure who they are. I mean, you may say, gee, we got a great medical device that's going to be more comfortable for people, but you're not selling to the patient, you're selling to the insurance companies, because they're going to pay the bill for that piece of equipment to be used on that patient. If you don't understand that you're selling to the insurance company, and in fact, we learned this past year, 2 years ago, is if you can't come up with what they call an ADA code, it's the 5-digit code that the medical insurance companies use, and if your test or your device doesn't fit into an existing code, you got problems, because the insurance companies will not approve it, because it's a huge project for them to create new codes for new kind of tests. So you could have the cure for cancer, but you won't get it to market if you can't find an ADA code to put it in for the insurance companies to pay for it. It's a fact of life. Very frustrating for entrepreneurs. The other thing I think you need to be an entrepreneur is that you need to fairly evaluate, and I emphasize, every comment or suggestion. I've seen it so many times in the business world where people will make comments, make suggestions in a discussion, and people will just ignore it, or they'll give it lip service. Well, you're not going to survive as a struggling entrepreneur in a startup company with a new product unless you listen to every single comment, particularly pardon me, when you start rolling out your new product. You spend 2 or 3 years developing it, somebody's giving you $1.5 million, you get it into their first client site, and they say, I don't understand these dials, or I don't understand this particular dial, or I can't read your manual isn't clear. They say, oh, don't worry about it, you'll get used to it. Believe me, the next 10 or 12 customers will be saying the same thing, and your sales will go nowhere, because you didn't listen to one comment, and it might be from a lab tech who's using the equipment. If the lab tech doesn't understand it, how are you going to get lab techs to use it? The feedback is going to be horrible to the management. I did a project, I was doing automation of factories and warehouses with one company I had, where we put in barcoding equipment with small screens on it, and you put them on all the workstations, and people, this was for, I can't tell you, it was for another defense project, nuclear industry, and they would get these pieces of equipment in, they would scan to start the project, then scan as they put different pieces in. Everything had to be tracked in detail for the National Regulatory Agency, and they would scan when they were done with it and pass it on. We built this system, several $100,000, installed it in this processing plant, trained all the people, and we left, and they started having problems with the equipment. And it was breaking down, cables would break, all kinds of problems. We went in, fixed everything, left, they had more problems. So I went in, I said, okay, I will work there for 3 days. I went in, worked the day shifts, took a quick nap, went in and worked on the night shifts. And what I found out by the second night was that several employees could not read. So we were giving them messages on the monitoring screen, telling them to go forward and do this and do that, and they didn't want to have to admit they couldn't read, so they were sabotaging the equipment. All right? That was amazing. So we went back and we put symbols next to the text and solved the problem. They're working in a facility to do